Hello, and welcome to another installment of Thoughts on International Business, Marketing, and Strategy. My name is Michael Czinkota, and my colleague here,
Charlie Skuba.
we're both professors at Georgetown University at the McDonough School of Business. And today's topic will be international trade in services. As we know, services have picked up very much in terms of volume, in terms of value, in terms of simple economic activity around the globe. And we are now faced with situations where in some countries, for example in the United States, up to 80% of GDP is services based. But our focus, of course, will again be on the international dimension. And the keeper of the latest data is, sure enough, my colleague, Professor Skuba.
Well, thank you, Michael. Yes, indeed. Services is a very critical part of the United States economy, very important to U.S. competitiveness in the world. U.S. Service providers across a variety of industries, including retail, medical services, air express delivery services, legal services, advertising and marketing services, and so on. Travel and tourism. It accounts for a significant amount of jobs. 4 out of 5 jobs in the United States are in the services sector. And U.S. exports of services had been growing robustly during the 2000s. In fact, in 2008, U.S. exports of services had grown by 20%. We have a good, significant surplus of about $150 million of exports versus imports of services for the United States. In fact, our exports of services are about $500 million. I'm sorry, $500 billion. I apologize, I understand.
What's a million and a billion? Quite similar. Go ahead.
In any event, in 2009, 2010 U.S. exports of services have once again returned to a period of growth after a bad year in 2008. U.S. exports of services and imports of services, for that matter, had fallen back to 2007 levels after this good period of growth. They're growing again, but there are barriers to their continued growth. I can talk about some patterns, Michael.
Well, perhaps just to interject briefly, if we look at major sectors which people often like to talk about in the trade context, one of them is, of course, manufacturing. And we'll have some time at another session to focus on that. But the key issue here is that trade in services, with its surplus for the United States, makes up a good chunk of the deficit that we're incurring in the manufacturing sector. And trade in services has actually the larger growth rates. And that is because it's no longer just flipping of hamburgers, as people flippantly used to say. We are now looking at teaching, at banking, at investigative, whatever services which are highly sophisticated. But please go ahead. You wanted to differentiate more.
I think it would be interesting to look at where we trade in services. And one thing to note in general is that as opposed to manufacturing, manufactured goods, services go relatively underreported. Just through glitches in our reporting systems. Customs officials can't really take advantage of every sale of services. But in general, the United States exports mostly to European countries and Canada. Those are our strongest trading partners, both in terms of exports and imports of services. But a key area for growth will be Asia. In the long run, China and India represent, India is one of our top 10, about the 10th largest country in terms of imports of services now. But it represents a great opportunity market for the United States exporters of services. there are significant barriers to U.S. and foreign exports, European exports of services in both China and India. The European Chamber of Commerce in Beijing recently released a report really detailing the significant obstacles in terms of transparency and bureaucratic difficulties, as well as administrative challenges with Chinese government agencies in terms of allowing U.S. and foreign and European companies to compete fairly in services in that market. On a final note, in India, the barriers to services abound. It's interesting that banks in the foreign banks are only allowed to open a number of new branches every year. U.S. and European telephone companies are not allowed access to overseas cables coming into India, the underseas cables, that is. And finally, to be an accountant in India, you have to be a graduate of an Indian university.
Well, you're absolutely right. Services performance is not uncontroversial and not necessarily easy on a global basis. But we know that services are much tougher to track than products because think of the attributes of services. Basically, a service tends to be intangible compared to a product. It also tends to be much more perishable. You know, at the end of the day, if you haven't sold a product, you roll it back into the warehouse. With a service, you can't roll it back. If you had an airline seat available during the entire flight from here to London, if that seat was empty, you've just lost the revenue from that seat. You can't store it or roll it out tomorrow morning again. So as a result, combined with these two dimensions, combined with the closer customer involvement, makes services more complex to deliver. It's a hard job to come across with a service which is seen as consistent all over the world and which offers quality to all consumers, especially because when the consumer is involved, keep in mind, they have all their own attitudes and backgrounds and got off with a different mood in the morning. So if I do a teaching service, one day that may work out for one student particularly well. Another day, the student is just tired from a party weekend and doesn't want to listen to anything or interact on Monday. But bottom line is services are growing. They're accounting for many jobs, and the jobs numbers are, of course, what we're looking for in terms of international trade growth. But they all have also their idiosyncrasies. And you know, Charlie, it may make sense to talk some more later about medical tourism as an example of services and expand a little bit as to how what this really means in terms of its application.
Yes. A growing market, probably more for foreign imports or U.S. imports of services as people seek cheaper costs overseas.
Well, so this is another session of our thoughts on international business, marketing, and strategy.
I'm Charlie Skuba.
I'm Michael Czinkota. We're both of Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.